Here's the thing that's astonishing. Throughout this series, we've explained that the condition of baseless hatred, sinat chinam, which means just not liking the other because they're not you, or because you don't look at them as being like you, right? So that condition, we've said, stems from the klipa of Midjan, which is the negative energy of the ancient nation called Midjan. When the Jews were leaving, when the Jews had left Egypt and had spent 40 years in the desert on their march, their final march, finally to the promised land, to the land of Israel, they encountered the nation of Midjan. And the nation of Midjan set out on a campaign to divide the Jewish people, to sow hatred amongst our own ranks. So the notion of creating division, of driving a wedge between individuals, whether it's an outside force or whether it's a force inside of us, God forbid, that drives a wedge between us and others, all of that is referred to euphemistically in Kabbalah as the condition of Midjan. But Midjan is not an ancient nation. Midjan is an ever-present condition. And we all have Midjan. Midjan is around us, and Midjan is inside of us. I've mentioned many, many times that when we talk about baseless hatred, it's easy to say, no, I don't have baseless hatred. All my hatred is well-grounded, right? I have very good justifications why I hate. It's not baseless. It's very well-founded. I have tons of good reasons why I don't like this person or that person or those people or those people. Tons of reasons. And yet, Kabbalah says that's exactly what baseless hatred means. Sinat chinam. Who in their right mind would say, I just hate because I hate, and I have no reason at all? No one said. Rationalization of hate is known as sinat chinam, is known as baseless hatred. Why? Because in truth, not how we convince ourselves, but in truth, there's no grounds for the hate. That's the truth. And so in this series, again, we're trying to explore, where does this hatred, where does the division come from? And the word hate is a strong word. And maybe not that long ago, I would have qualified that by saying, well, it's a strong word, but, we mean any form of divisiveness and whatever, any form of tension, as subtle as it might be. But you know what? Let's just call it baseless hatred. Let's just call it hatred. Yeah? Let's be honest. There is a condition out there in which individuals, and it could be in any group, in any sector. It could be within the Jewish community itself. It can be within other communities, between communities. It doesn't make a difference. Where does it come from? Where does the hate come from? It comes from Midjan. Midjan, Madon, Meriva. Midjan is related to the word Madon, Meriva, which means splitting apart and creating animosity, creating friction. There's a force that exists, and the force, it's not somewhere, in an ethereal space. It's a force that we each have inside of us that drives us away from others, that compels us or encourages us to drive wedges between others. There's a force that creates friction, that splinters and fractures. It's a force. It's easy to say it's in somewhere else, in someone else, but we each have this inherent nature, this inherent negative desire or drive to have tension and friction. It's not someone else's problem. It's all of our problems. If you're looking for someone to blame, you can point the finger at Adam and Eve. That's fine. I don't mind. I mean, I do mind because it's all of us also. But from Adam and Eve, all the negativity is now inside of us. Before Adam and Eve, it was outside of them. It was an external voice that said, do this, do that, that's unhealthy, or that's not true. It was the external serpent, a force outside of their own consciousness that encouraged them to take missteps. But now, post-sin, that negative drive is inside of all of us. And we each have it. And the more we pretend like we don't have it, well, the more we're ignoring reality. And the further away any solutions can actually be achieved. And so the point here is to understand that the klipa of midjan, the force that we call midjan in Kabbalah, this idea of this animosity, this hatred, this fighting, this friction, that force is perpetual. It always exists, and it always provides a challenge to what's really true and really good. And what is really true and really good? It's symbolized by the divine name Havaya. God's four-letter name is known sometimes in English as the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. We don't pronounce it the way it's written. It's such a holy name. That four-letter name of God symbolizes divine oneness. It's the name of God that's used in the Shema prayer, which comes from the verse in Deuteronomy, I believe 6:4, that says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The word in Hebrew that's being translated here as the Lord could very well be translated as God also. It's an arbitrary English translation, but the word that's used to refer to God here is Havaya. Havaya Elokeinu, Havaya Echad. Havaya is one. The divine name Havaya is one. And it's easy to say, it's easy to come to the conclusion as follows. That Havaya is oneness, and that is togetherness, and that is when there's no fighting, when there's that instead of hate there's love, and instead of friction there's unity. And that's Havaya, and everything else is midjan. And it's easy to say that, you know what, that's evil and klipa, and where does it come from? It must come from some other place. But of course we know that in Judaism, Havaya Echad, God is one, means that there's no other source. Which means I'm about to say something very radical. And that is, in Judaism, unlike other religions, we don't believe in a good God and then an evil force that counteracts God. Everything comes from oneness. Everything comes from God. Even the Yetzer Hara, even the evil inclination, even the Nefesh HaBahamis, even the animal soul, all come from the same space. It's just that in its source, it's pure, but as it devolves down, as it tumbles down through the architecture of existence, that which begins as pure can become manifest as something less than pure. But everything comes from the same source. Today we're going to explore the source of diversity that eventually leads to animosity and hate. We're going to discover that source in the essence of God, not the hate part, but the diversity part, which then can lead to that hate when blended together with the wrong ingredients. But again, I want to make sure we have the teams, if you will, straight. There's Team Midjan, which is fighting, and Team Havaya, which is oneness and unity. But the big reveal that we're going to have by the end of today's class, hopefully, if we can get to it, is that even the source of Midjan, even Midjan is ultimately sourced in a holy space. It's just that it becomes twisted as it tumbles through the Seder Hishtalshelut, the order of existence. If what I'm saying now is not 100% clear, that's okay, because we haven't gone through all the steps. I'm giving you kind of an overview. We're going to explain in more depth Midjan, Havaya, and the divine origins in Atzmos, in the essence of God. We're going to get to all of this today, hopefully. But first, I want to quickly recap what we did the last few weeks. What we did the last few weeks was to look at the name Havaya and to find that even in Havaya, which is the name of divine oneness, we also have this notion of, at least in a soft form, of diversity or pluralism or plurality. In other words, even in the divine name Havaya, which is the divine name that connotes oneness, there's also the notions of diversity, and this was presented in the form of a question, which we didn't finish the question, but we began asking the question. We say that the divine name Havaya is oneness, it doesn't seem to be so one. There are 4 letters of the divine name, Yud, and Hey, and Vav, and another Hey. We have 4 letters. Each one represents 4 different realities, 4 worlds, 4 energies. Over the last few weeks, we've spoken about the 4 steps in the creative process. We've spoken about, last week, we spoke about 4 dimensions of the human condition, which tie into 4 levels of compatibility when it comes to relationships. And so far from being this state of oneness, it seems like the 4 letters of the divine name are very much tied into different energies. In the context of teaching, we talked about Simsum Hispashtus, Hamshacha Hispashtus. You may recall those terms as the initial contraction of the teacher, of the educator, using the analogy of education, and then how that expands. That's the Yud, and how it expands the Hey in the teacher's mind to develop the lesson plan around that point, around that central Nakuda, central point, and then how it's transmitted down to the student, or over to the student, so to speak, and then how subsequently it expands in the student's mind, like a seed that's planted, a single kernel that's planted that can blossom into an entire orchard. Many, many generations of life-giving trees, of fruit-bearing trees. So is one idea transmitted from teacher to student, or one idea that a teacher allows a student to accept and to take in and to internalize, that can cause tremendous growth. Those were the 4 steps. And those are different steps. Your initial contraction is not your expansion. And none of that is the transmission. And none of that is the ultimate expansion within the student. And when we spoke last week about relationships, and we spoke about 4 dimensions in relationships, from the bottom up: physical compatibility, emotional compatibility, intellectual compatibility, and spiritual compatibility. These also seem like 4 different dimensions, 4 different levels, if you will. And so what we're finding here, and this is what we're getting to in our text, what we find is that although we say Havaya Echad, that God's name Havaya is one, seems to have more than one component. It's far from monolithic. It's very diverse. You have different energies working together, but different energies. You have a Yud energy, a Hey energy, a Vav energy, a Hey energy, and depending on what you're talking about, those all mean different things. But no matter what you're talking about, they mean different things. So what's going on exactly with this oneness of Havaya? Because, and let me just mention one more point before we jump into text today. I don't think we've jumped inside over the last few weeks, and that's going to change today. We're going to do a lot inside in the text. We've been contrasting the name Havaya, this name of oneness, if you will, with the divine name Elokim, which also means God, but which is actually a plural term. And why is it a plural term? So Kabbalah explains, not because there are many gods, but because this is God in the modality of creating plurality. God creating diverse beings. So in the beginning of the Torah, it says in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And it continues to talk about all of the diversity of creation. Heaven and earth, light and darkness, land and sea, trees and plants, vegetation, birds in the sky, fish in the sea, animals, creepy crawly life, all type of animated life, and of course human beings. And the Torah talks about all the diversity of creation as being created by which name? Bereshit bara Elokim. In the beginning, Elokim created. Elokim is the divine name that connotes diversity and plurality. Many things, not one thing, but many things. And in Kabbalah, it's classically contrasted with the name Havaya, which is oneness. So we have 2 names. Very, very strict here with the labels, right? We have one name of God that evokes oneness, Havaya, and one name of God that evokes or bespeaks or serves as the source of diversity, and that's Elokim. And it's almost like you have 2 different sides. Havaya on the one side, oneness, Elokim on the other side, diversity and plurality. And our text questions that entire premise. 9 out of 10 times when you study Kabbalah and you study the names of Hashem, God's names, Havaya and Elokim, you'll come to this point that we just mentioned, the binary idea. That one means one and one means many. Havaya is a source of oneness, and Elokim is a source of diversity. Our text that we're studying right now questions this very premise and says, wait, you're telling me that Havaya is oneness? You're telling me that the name Havaya is only one? No diversity? No plurality? It's not a multifaceted energy. It's a monolithic energy. Really? What about the 4 letters of the name Havaya? Have you looked at the way you spell it? Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey? And have you studied Kabbalah? You know what those 4 letters mean? Yud is tzimtzum, it's small. Hey is expansion, hispashtos. Vav is transmission. Hey is expansion. And you're telling me that's one? How's that one? That's 4 different dimensions. Spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. That's 1 level? That's 4 levels. I'm seeing diversity here. 4 worlds, Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. The world of emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, the world of action. Is that 1 or is that 4? What's clear in our text is that although we say very often that Havaya is 1, and we literally say it in the Shema twice a day, Hashem Echad, God is 1, the name Havaya connotes oneness. When you look at the letters, you don't see 1. You see 4, which gives rise to many more than 4, but 4, at least you have 4. 4 energies, 4 different aspects. So what's this oneness business? So this is the core question that we're at in our text. And I'm going to share my screen with you. Right now. Yeah. I'm going to share my screen with you and we're going to set this together. Make sense so far? So far so good? Yes? Okay. Okay, this is the text that we're studying. It's called, in the original, it's called Hechaltzu, Ranat. For those studying at home, Hechaltzu Ranat. 32 chapters. Lev, heart, 32. The pages look like this. Blocks of text with some of the greatest and most magnificent Kabbalistic ideas ever taught and formulated. We have a translation here. The translation was done years ago, decades ago. It's out of print. I have a copy that I downloaded from HebrewBooks.org, which is a website that's scanned with permission from the publisher many thousands and thousands of Jewish books, and freely available and recommended if anybody ever has a desire to look up a book, look up a text, they can't find it or they don't have it. Feel free to check HebrewBooks.org or Sefaria, another website that has good stuff. But these are scans of the books. Sefaria kind of retypesets it. Okay, here we go. Let's jump in. Chapter 19. We already started chapter 19. So I just want to start off in the beginning, just so you can see where we are with this. Because we're questioning what we know about Havaya and Elokim. This premise, chapter 19, that there's no differentiation in the name Havaya is not yet clear. For it is known that the ultimate source of creation is the name Havaya. So the first point that he mentions, the first question that he has is, look, you were trying to make it sound in Kabbalah that all the diversity of creation, all of the many, billions and trillions and whatever, however many number of things that exist, they all come from Elokim, which is plurality, which is like the divine source of plurality. But Havaya is oneness, and that's not the source of all of this creation that's so diverse. Well, that's not so true, because the ultimate source of creation, no matter how you slice it, is the name Havaya. And then he says, although creation occurs through the name Elokim, the true source is Havaya. Okay, that was the question number 1. The next question, and I'm skipping because we did this inside already a few weeks ago. I'm just trying to kind of get a running start here. Going back a little bit, but we're going to catch up to where we are right now. So number one, we said, first part of the question is Havaya is the source of creation. So you can't tell me that Elokim, the name of plurality, is the source of plurality. The name Havaya seems to be the source. And how is Havaya the source of plurality? It doesn't seem to make sense. The next question is that Havaya, we know in Kabbalah, creates hidden worlds, worlds that sense the Creator. Elokim creates revealed worlds, worlds that look at themselves as independent creatures. Nonetheless, the creation created by Havaya is also diverse. Even though we call it hidden world, it's still diverse. As he says right here in this next paragraph that I want to share with you, right here at the top, now in the creations of the hidden worlds, which are created from Havaya, there is great particularization and differentiation. So what we see here is, number one, Havaya is the ultimate source of creation and plurality. Number two, even if you want to say that Havaya mainly focuses on the hidden worlds, worlds that sense their creator, nonetheless, there's diversity there. And now we pick up to the new conversation. And by the way, all of this that's in the next few paragraphs are things that we covered the last few weeks. And you'll see them, and hopefully they'll make sense. That's why I went for the last 2 weeks with those ideas and introductions in order that these few paragraphs should be understandable. So let's jump in. This name, the name Havaya, which we always understand, this name is Havaya, which we always understand as being the name of oneness, he says, is composed of 4 letters, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, which represent separate and distinct levels. In general terms, its 4 letters include within themselves the 4 worlds of Atzilut. I'm using the Sfardi Havara. Could pronounce it Atzilus or Atzilut. To be consistent, I'm going to go with the T ending. Atzilut, Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. So the 4 letters of God's name, Havaya, which usually means, or is understood to mean oneness, the name of oneness is in fact 4. 4 worlds: emanation, creation, formation, and action. The Yud refers to Atzilut, the world of emanation, the Hey to Bria, the world of creation, the Vav to Yetzir, the world of formation, and the final Hey to the world of Asiya, the world of action. So you're telling me it's 1? 4 worlds. These 4 worlds are not insignificant. These 4 worlds represent, like I said last week, 4 realities: spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. The world of Atzilut is a world of godliness. The world of Bria is a world of intellect, divine intellect. The angels and souls know God. Yetzir is a world in which the angels and souls feel God. And Asiya is a physical world created with a world filled with physical beings who pretty much have no recognition of their creator, other than what we learn through the books and what we can meditate on, beyond what we see with the naked eye. And all of that comes from Havaya. So you're telling me Havaya is monolithic. Havaya is 1. What kind of 1? Ranging from the spirit, from the godly to the physical. You're telling me all of that is 1? Atzilut is 1 with Asiya? Are you kidding me? More specifically, back inside. More specifically, the name Havaya is present within the 10 Sfirot, the 10 divine emanations within each of the 4 worlds. I didn't explain this before, but we're doing this right now. We have 10 divine emanations: Chachma, Bina, Dat, Chesed, Gevura, Teferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. 10 Sfirot, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional. And he says the 4 letters of God's name, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, correspond to these 10 Sfirot as follows. Yud corresponds to Chachma, wisdom. Hey to Bina, understanding. Vav to Ze'er Ampin, the 6 emotive attributes from Chesed through Yesod. And and the final Hey to Malchut, kingship. Notice that Dat is missing. In this count, probably Keter is counted and not Dat. Don't worry about that. That's already next level discussion, or for another time discussion. It's not for right now. The core point here is that the 4 letters of God's name match up roughly with the 10 Sfirot, and thus all the diversity of the Sfirot is represented or sourced the diversity of the four letters of God's name. The order, let's continue inside. The order of the descent and flow of the spiritual light into each world is represented by these four letters. How does the light come into the world? How is the light transmitted from higher to lower? This is why I gave the example 2 weeks ago of a teacher and a student. How do you transmit something from source to recipient, so to speak? How does that flow work? It's represented also by these four letters, which respectively signify tzimtzum, contraction, hispashtut, expansion, hamshacha, drawing down, and again, hispashtut, expansion. 2 weeks ago I explained it. I mentioned it a moment ago also. You have the initial contraction, then the expansion, then you have the expansion, then you have the drawing down or the transmission, and then the expansion, the recipient. That's also represented by these four letters of God's name, Havaya. Elsewhere, let's continue. Elsewhere, it is explained at length how all transference of light from one level to another, from one dimension to the other, must occur through these four stages. For when light exists in a higher realm, it is in a state too concentrated to be absorbed by a less spiritual lower realm. Think of the example that I gave of teacher and student. If the teacher were to speak to the student like a colleague, it's not going to work. It's not going to work yet. You have to understand the limitations of your student. You have to understand how their mind works and what they know and what they don't know. And then you have to condense and contract and get to a core point that they'll be able to understand. And then you build that out. And then you transmit it. And then it builds out within them. But that's always when you're dealing with an other who is of a different level than the source. Let's go back to the brackets. For when light exists in a higher realm, it is in a state too concentrated to be absorbed by a less spiritual lower realm. Hence, it must be successfully contracted and expanded, and then drawn down into the lower realm where it is expanded again, this time within the context of the lower realm. These stages correspond to the 10 sefirot, Chachma representing contraction, Bina expansion, and so on. This will be discussed further on, he says. Okay. Again, I told you 2 weeks ago about the process of education, and I didn't necessarily tie it so fully into the 10 sefirot and all the labels, although I did use these labels somewhat, but now you're seeing the way these terms, the way these concepts exist in their source in Kabbalah, where they're very abstract. Right, we're talking about two different dimensions. Let me explain what's going on here. In this text, he explains how you have two different worlds, and how the light is transferred from one world to the next, from a higher world to a lower world. And because the light in the higher world is greater than what the lower world can contain, it must be first contracted, then expanded within the original realm, and then it has to be transmitted down, drawn down into the subsequent realm, and then there it's expanded again. And honestly, if we studied it right here on this level, it would probably make no sense, right? It would be just words. Contraction, expansion, transmission, expansion. Yeah, makes sense, sort of. Yeah, maybe. But when we talk about education, when we talk about communication, and how all communication, healthy communication, how all creativity really requires these four steps. 2 weeks ago, I believe the topic was the Kabbalah of Creativity. We explained how any creative endeavor, any creative movement undergoes these four dimensions. Now it's not a theory. Now it's a reality. Now it's something that makes sense. First you have to have the Yud, and then the Hey, and then the Vav, and then the Hey. And it's true above, and it's true below. It's true in the spiritual realms. It's true right here on planet Earth. It's true with God, and it's true with you and I. And it's true on every level. The bottom line is, all of these are rooted in the four letters of God's name, Havaya. Let's continue. It is by means of these four letters of God's name, Yod Kei Vav Kei, and their functions of contraction, expansion, and so on, that each world and its creations are created ex nihilo, from nothing to something. It actually Ex nihilo means something from nothing, but this is why the name they comprise is Havaya, which is etymologically related to Mehave, creator, for it is the source which creates something from nothing. And now he ties it back to the original point that I showed you at the beginning of chapter 19, where he questions the entire premise that creation stems from Elokim, which is plurality, which is diversity. No, creation comes from Havaya. Havaya means Mehave, creator. Mehave means to create, or creator. Havaya is God's creative force, which creates diversity. And that's Yud Kei Vav Kei. And so the question is, how do we say, in many Kabbalists, throughout Kabbalah, how do we say always that Elokim represents diversity? Havaya represents oneness. What kind of oneness? It's the source of creation plurality. It's got 4 letters, 4 worlds, 10 sfirot, 4 steps of the creative process to create something from nothing. By the way, this paragraph, which I went through very quickly, because again, all this we explained over the last few weeks just using different language. This idea that is by means of these 4 letters, that each world and its creations are created from nothing to something, that's why I titled the class 2 weeks ago, the Kabbalah of Creativity. How do you create something from nothing? How do you come up with a new idea? And how do you give that to the world? That creative process on every level comprises these 4 letters, 4 levels, and 4 steps. It's the same in every area. Okay, let's get back to our question. Let's get back to our text. Since we thus see that the name Havaya comprises different levels, what, and this is the question, what is the difference between the name Elokim, which is in the plural form, and the name Havaya, which is one? That's the question. We've been building up to this question for the last 3 weeks. If, in fact, Havaya is also the source of plurality, if Havaya has 4 letters, not just 1, if Havaya refers to all 4 worlds, if Havaya refers to the process by which all creation and all diverse creation happens, if that's the case, then why is Elokim a plural name, and Havaya, we say, connotes one? What's going on with that? That's the question. What essentially is the difference between Havaya and Elokim? Why is one one and one many, or one plural? What's going on? And here's the answer. Before we get to the answer, it's easy to say that Havaya is one, and that's the good side, if you will. Elokim is plurality, and that's where all the negative stuff comes from. 2 sources. But as I said before, we know that's not true. Because we don't believe, Judaism, Kabbalah does not believe in dueling source forces. We don't believe in that. It's not like there's a God that's good and then this other force that's nefarious, that's counteracting God. That's giving too much power to something else. There's nothing else that ultimately has power. So to put everything in a box or 2 boxes, you're packing, and one box says one, and one box says many, and one says Havaya, and one says Elokim, neatly packed away. It's too neat. It's too easy. It's too binary. That's not the way this works. It's not the way this works. So here we go. Let's jump in. The answer to this question, and I need to tell you these last 2 paragraphs of chapter 19 will give you the core of the answer, which is then developed in chapter 20. And we're going to jump into chapter 20 as well. The answer to this question is that although the name Havaya does include a variety of levels, they all exist in a state of unity and synthesis. So, notwithstanding all of the plurality, diversity, differentiation that does come from the name Havaya, the diversity born of Havaya is diversity that remains in a state of unity and synthesis. It's diverse, but one. It has been previously explained back inside that the epitome of unity is attained when many details are synthesized and actually become a single entity. Through the unity of the name Havaya, unity is achieved in creations that have come into individual existence. Despite their great differentiation, there is a unity that pervades them all. And now we've added another level. We referenced it before in a previous chapter. As he says over here, it's been previously explained. We did reference it before in our classes. This is a few months ago. But here it packs a massive punch. The name Havaya does spawn diversity. But when Havaya is expressed, when Havaya is manifest, all of those diverse entities, all of the diversity comes together. It comes together as a single entity, not a monolithic entity, but a unified entity. So again, those last two lines are very important. Through the unity of the name Havaya, unity is achieved in creations that have come into individual existence. How do you go from many to one? It's through the name Havaya. Havaya is the power of unity within diversity. Despite their great differentiation, there is a unity that pervades them all. That core essential unity that can be rediscovered is the legacy of the name Havaya. So you may be thinking, the way it's written in Kabbalah, it's kind of like abstract, maybe a little bit hard to understand. I want to speak very real to you now. You look at the world, and the world seems so the world is so fragmented. And in many ways, it feels so broken. And in many ways, it feels so splintered and fractured that there's no way this can come together. There's no way. How is this going to come together? Right? How are people going to come together? And these last two paragraphs tell us what is the legacy of the name Havaya. I don't mean legacy like Havaya is gone and this is what it's left us with, but what is the energy of the name Havaya? The energy of the name Havaya is that despite, I'm just reading the last line, despite their great differentiation, there is a unity that pervades them all, whether you see it or not. Whether you see it or whether I see it, whether a person chooses to see it or not, whether a person chooses to embrace it or not, the reality is the reality. And what is the reality? The reality is that there is oneness here at the core of everything. There's oneness, and that oneness is deeper. It runs deeper than the diversity. It runs deeper than the differentiation. So you can look at the outside or you can look at the inside. You look at the outside, you see difference. Look at the inside, you see sameness. In the email that introduced this week's class, I wrote about these two perspectives that we have. One perspective is we're all different. And it's an obvious perspective. Of course we're all different. I mean, could you say we're all the same? That would be impossible to say that we're all the same. Of course we're all different. We think different, we feel different, we act different, right? We believe different things. We're all different. No two strands of DNA are alike amongst human beings, right? No fingerprints are alike. No perspectives or minds are alike. Everyone's different and unique on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're all the same. Of course we're one. Of course we're the same. Where do we come from if not one source and one root and one God? And don't our souls share the same DNA? Of course we're one. So which is it? Is it me or we? Is it I or us? The name Havaya, we're going to explain the interplay between Havaya and Elokim in chapter 20 and how they're both sourced in the essence of God. But right now we already have an insight on this. Right now we already have an insight to tell us that yes, of course you and I sense a we and an us. Sorry. Of course you and I sense a me and an I, which is the differentiation, the walls, the barriers that exist between us. Of course we sense that. But the name Havaya is a testament to the fact that at the core On a deeper level, there's a unity that pervades them all. Notwithstanding the differentiation, there is a unity that pervades them all. And it's up to us. Very, very simple choice. Will you look at the outside, or will you look at the inside? Will you look at the outside, differentiation, or will you look at the inside, the name Havaya that is running through everything, that yes, spawns diversity also, but spawns diversity in a unified manner. To illustrate this, I want to go back to my example of teaching. Havaya, we said, has 4 letters, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And we said Simtsum, Hispashtut, Hamshacha, Hispashtut, the initial contraction and the expansion in the mind of the teacher, the transmission and the expansion in the mind of the student. Going back to my example of educating in the 4 levels. It's throughout the creative process, but let's stick with the education example. It's a simple, clear example. Let me ask you a question. What would happen if the teacher, who has a lot of information, a lot of wisdom, contracts down to a single point? This is the point. Stay with me for a second. There's a single point that is intended to share. That's the Yud. And then in the Hey stage, where he or she is building the lesson, imagine if they build the lesson, the Hey, around a completely different point. I hope you're following what I'm saying. Imagine if the Yud is in one place, and the Hey, the expansion, is in a completely different place. Right? You had a point. You have a point that you wish to convey. You want your student to walk away with this point. But then the lesson that you build is around a completely different point. And then the Vav that you share is a completely different point. It's a new point altogether. You end up presenting something totally different. And the student understands a 4th thing, which is completely different than all of the above. Is this education? You know what this sounds to me like? Chaos. A chaos of ideas. The teacher's not clear, the student's not clear, no one's clear, no one knows what's being taught, no one knows what was supposed to be taught, no one understands what was learned, no one understands what was supposed to be learned. It's chaos. And the chaos happened because there was no unity that ran through the 4 diverse dimensions. And I hope you understand what I'm saying here. Yes, there are 4 diverse dimensions, but the only way they work is if there's a single thread that runs through them all. If your Yud is in one place, your Hey is in a second place, your Vav is in a third place, and your final Hey is in a completely different place altogether, that's not education. That's not learning. That's chaos. That's confusion. That's a disaster. You have one idea in mind, you're formulating a second idea, teaching a third idea, and the student's understanding a 4th idea. That's a failure in education. That's a teacher not teaching properly. Because the only way it works, and again, this is true in any creative process, is if you have a thread that runs from the top to the bottom. A single thread that unites all 4 dimensions. When they work together, then you have the name Havaya. Then you can create something. If an artist has a vision in one place, expands it in a second place, transmits it in a third place, and it's understood in a 4th place, I mean, maybe when it comes to art, maybe it's interesting, but it's not conveying the intention. And it's not what true creativity is about, at least as understood by the name Havaya. So as diverse as Havaya is, diversity, look at this, 4 different letters, 4 different realities. Yeah, it's one diversity. Sure. Yeah, you're right. But don't you see the oneness there? Don't you see a unity that pervades them all? Again, last sentence. Despite their great differentiation, there is a unity that pervades them all. This is consistent with Havaya itself. This line that I just highlighted is how we talk about the way Havaya creates and the effect of Havaya creating, the effect in the world. But if you look at Havaya itself, it models this process. The diversity of Havaya is working together. It's not fighting. It's not in conflict with each other. The Yud and the He and the Vav and the He are not in conflict with each other. If you're creating a product and you have a vision for what you want to build, and then as it's expanded, it becomes something else. And then as it's created, it becomes a third thing. And then the user does something else with it. Purchaser, whatever. The recipient. You're not dealing with a thing. You're dealing with, it's chaos. And I would say many great ideas die because it splits apart. Because you don't have that oneness that flows through it. Part of being a successful creator is the ability to hold that original vision, that Yud, to keep that in mind and to see it through. Otherwise, what do you have? You have chaos. So let me check in. Make sense so far? Yes? Let me stop share so I can see everybody's faces. I love seeing everybody. Yes? Make sense so far? Okay. Let's jump in. We're moving into chapter 20. Okay. Chapter 20. This then is the difference between the name Havaya and the name Elokim. Remember, a moment ago we asked the question, isn't Havaya also diversity? I hope the before and afters are clear. Before, in Kabbalah, we always thought Havaya is one, and Elokim is plurality. So it's oneness versus plurality. Very, very binary, very distinct. Great. Our discourse, our text says, no, that's not so true. Havaya is also diversity. But now we've just explained that the diversity of Havaya is really oneness. So now he says, this then is the difference. It's a much more subtle difference. But it's still a difference between the name Havaya and the name Elokim. And this is where we go even higher. This is new information. We're going to do it inside, and then I'm going to explain. Both are expressions of God's infinity. Listen carefully. Both are expressions of God's infinity, though in two different ways. Havaya elicits the unity of created beings, Elokim their diversity. I can't overemphasize, although it's brackets, it's not in the original. Nonetheless, this line is really important. Both are expressions of God's infinity. Like I said before, we don't have two sources. We have one source. One God, one source that is the source of both Havaya and Elokim. Havaya and Elokim at the end of the day are both names of God that are both coming from the same essence. To recap, I said this several weeks ago, there's a difference between name and essence. I can call you by your name, or I can speak to you. You can look at yourself as I or your name. And those are two different realities. If you were on a desert island and no one was around, would you need a name? The answer is probably not. Why? Because no one needs to call you. So no one needs to differentiate between you and the person next to you to call you by a name. Right? So do you need a name for you? No. Think of a story. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, was once playing with his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who would later become the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe had him on his lap, and he was talking to him, making him laugh. And he said, Avu Zayde, which is, where is Zayde? Where is grandfather? And so the little grandson points to his grandfather's face. He says, no, That's Zayda's face. Where's Zayda? Points to his arm. No, that's Zayda's arm. Where's Zayda? Points to his leg. No, that's Zayda's leg. Where's Zayda? See what's going on here? Right? The grandfather's saying, these are all, where's Zayda? These are all parts. So at some point, very smart child, jumps off his grandfather's lap, goes into the other, walks out of that room, and begins, I think he cried really loud, like as if he got hurt. And his grandfather immediately got up. And the child came in and said, that's Zayda, right? I got you. That's you, right? Yeah, it's your head, your beard, your face, your eyes, your arm, your leg. Yeah, right. But when you're fully present, that's you. When you're engaged, that's you. Same thing is true with the name and the essence. Everyone has a name, everyone has a handle. And it's not only your given name, it's also different aspects of your personality. But these are all reflections of self. But then there's the core, right? Then there's the core that's beyond the name. So what we're saying here, and this is going to be a magnificent point, is that Havaya and Elokim are both coming from a higher place. A single higher place. Okay. Yeah, you can ask him too. So Havaya and Elokim are both coming from a higher reality, which is known in Hebrew and Kabbalah as Atzmut, which means the essence. And Atzmut is used as an expression, just so you know. The word Atzmut is used to signify that which is beyond the name. This is something we've discussed many times, how no matter what name or like term that we try to use for God, it's ultimately limiting. Well, the word Atzmut is the one word that's used to signify that which is beyond any names and beyond any labels. That which is essence, that which just is. So he's saying that what that is. And here we get to this mind-bending and mind-blowing idea. In truth, Havaya and Elokim are one. You thought they were different. You thought we had two names of God. You thought we had a very clean binary construct. Havaya is one, Elokim is plural. Yeah, we all have these buckets. Good. Havaya is this, Elokim is that. No. Havaya and Elokim are one. The name Elokim, listen to this. The name Elokim, which we said before is plurality and diversity, right? The name Elokim actually represents the infinite God, or the infinite essence of God, as does the name Havaya. Therefore, the name Elokim in no way conceals the name Havaya, so that even the creations brought into being through the name Elokim are absolutely unified with their Creator. We might have thought before, and this is something that is so revolutionary in Kabbalah, because you might have thought before that Havaya is the oneness, and Elokim is the layer that conceals the oneness to give rise to diversity. Not so true. He says, not so true. The name Havaya and the name Elokim both are coming from the infinite essence. And the name Elokim doesn't actually conceal the name Havaya. Even the creations brought into being through the name Elokim are absolutely unified with their Creator. However, what's the however? There's still a difference. However, the name Elokim reveals the diversity of the creations, causing them to be created with many separate and distinctive characteristics. In other words, Havaya and Elokim are really two sides of the same coin. Like I said before, we don't have two forces, two sources. There's one source. But the one source, we have two sides. It's of the same coin, but still two sides. The name Elokim side of the coin reveals the diversity. And where does the diversity come from? from the infinite essence. Let's continue inside. This truly manifests the multiplicity of individual aspects within Atzmut, God's essence. Here it says God's being, God's essential being. Let me explain what he's saying here. Where does diversity come from ultimately? Diversity is not a perversion of oneness. Diversity is in and of itself an expression of Atzmut, an expression of God's infinite being. You see, we might have thought that it's the oneness that expresses God and the plurality that pulls us away from God and God's oneness that then we're trying to fight against. Right? The oneness is a pure expression of God's reality. And the diversity, that's where it gets perverted. That's where it gets messed up. And our goal is to get rid of the diversity, get back to that state of oneness. That's what we might have thought before. That Havaya and Elokim are actually fighting against each other. Havaya is promoting oneness, Elokim is promoting plurality, diversity, and it's a cage match. It's a battle between the two. He says, no, of course not. Havaya and Elokim are one. They're both expressions of Atzmut, of God's essence, but expressing different abilities of God. So here's one ability. How many things can God create? Yeah? God is infinite. How many things can God create? How many different things can God create? What's the answer? Unmute yourself if you can tell me the answer. If God is infinite, I'm giving you a simple formula here, yeah? If God is infinite and not limited to anything, how many different things can he create?
It's infinite.
Infinite.
You can't count it.
Good. Guess which name of God expresses God's infinite ability to create infinite number of things?
All of them.
Elokim. Huh?
All of them.
Right? Well, which name of God? Which name of God represents or expresses God's infinite ability to create an infinite number of things? Elokim. Elokim is not Elokim is not a concealment of God. This is the big idea today. Elokim is not a concealment of God's truth. Like we would say that God's truth is oneness. Elokim, that's a concealment of that truth. No. Elokim is a revelation of God's infinite power to create an infinite number of beings. That's what Elokim is. Elokim is nothing but God flexing his infinite muscles and the infinite ability to create an infinite number of things. Let's continue inside. This is something we actually touched on recently in the Miracles course. For, we might ask, how is it that the created beings comprise such endless and limitless multitudes? He's asking a simple question. How is the universe so diverse? How are there so many different things in existence? Forget about within our own planet or our own galaxy or our own solar system. Imagine all of the stuff everywhere, all of that stuff. The more we know about the universe, or all of this stuff, right, the larger it gets, right? The bigger it gets. Where does all of this come from? And how is it that there is such endless and limitless multitudes? Jump inside. Since they are intrinsically finite, there surely should be a limit to their number. How is it that they, in other words, everything, how is it that they are found in measureless variety? How are there so many things? Right? If finite rules the day, so how do you have this infinite, this endless number of things? And by the way, you might be thinking, well, it's not an infinite number of things. Surely it's finite. Who says? Do you know the total number? Do you know that things are not expanding constantly? Do you know that there is? Do you know for a fact? Does science know for a fact that there is an edge to anything? The answer is no. Science does not know the parameters of the universe, the parameters of the galaxy, the parameters of the solar system. It doesn't know. And the more we know, the more we discover. And the more things we add into the mix. Kabbalah tells us that creation itself is limitless. I happen to believe Kabbalah when it says that. The question here is, if creation itself is finite, how is the finite creation infinite number? And here's the answer. We already gave the answer before, but here he spells it out. However, because the infinite God is perfectly all-encompassing, he contains within himself the potential of creating multiplicity without end or measure, a function of infinity. In other words, even when God creates finite beings, he can create an infinite number of finite beings. That expresses, that flexes, that's my flexing motion, whether it is or not, that's what I'm doing right now to signify the flexing, right? That's God flexing the power of infinity. God's power of infinity is expressed by virtue of such vast and limitless existence that God created. Yes, each being is finite. Each one has its nature, its personality, its space, its time. Everything has its box that it's in. But the limitless number of things, that itself evokes, or that evokes God's infinite power, an infinite power that stems from the infinite essence of God. This is what Elohim is. I'm going to emphasize it one more time because I need to make sure that what we thought before and what we thought now are different. Because if we just thought all of the above without this differentiation, then I'm not doing a good job in modeling what I spoke about before of having a nakuda and expanding it and transmitting and then expanding in your mind. I want to make sure that my 4 letters, if you will, Yud Kei Vav Kei, this morning are lining up. What we thought before this chapter, chapter 20 of this text, and what you might think after studying many Kabbalistic texts, is that Havaya and Elokim are working against each other. Havaya is oneness, and Elokim is diversity. And there's the oneness voice that says oneness, 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 and diversity says no, diversity, 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 and they're fighting against each other. What he says here is that both of these are coming from a higher place. And in that higher place, both are unified. Both are coming from the infinite essence of God. Both Havaya and Elokim are really coming from the source. By the way, let me clarify this even more. Most times that you study this in Kabbalah, you come to the following conclusion. And I said this before, but let me state it very clearly. That Elokim is a distortion of the truth. The truth is oneness. Elokim, which creates diversity, is a distortion of the truth that gives you the appearance that you're different than the other one. And that's not true. That's a big lie. And where does the lie come from? Elokim. The name Elokim. The name Elokim makes it seem like so many different things. In truth, they're all one. Havaya is the truth, and Elokim is the distortion. That's what we think, typically, when we study Kabbalah. Havaya is the truth, it's one. Elokim, the plurality, is the distortion. That's what challenges us against the one, and the goal is to discard Elokim and find Havaya. And in our chapter, chapter 20, in our text, he says that's not the case. It's not true. There's nothing wrong with Elokim. There's nothing to discard. Elokim is absolutely true. Elokim is not only true because we see it, Elokim is true because it's coming from the greatest truth of God. The greatest truth of a God beyond any names, Havaya or Elokim. The infinite reality and being of God, a God that is beyond any definition, is a God that's not limited to any number of creations. That infinite power of God is flexed when God creates without end or measure. When God creates multiplicity without end or measure, which is the diversity, which is Elokim. So Elokim is absolutely an expression of the source, of the infinite source. At the same time, and I wish this was a different paragraph because it really is a massive pivot, because now we're going to the name Havaya. At the same time, all that is comprised within him, within the infinite essence, is one, and in a state of absolute unity, which is known as Yachid. For at this level, it is inappropriate to speak of a variety of particulars, heaven forbid. To speak of multiplicity within God's being would be a denial of God's fundamental oneness. Rather, the particulars are united into oneness in an ultimate state of unity. Now, this is hard. This is hard for us. The language gets in the way of this concept, but I'm hoping you can sense it on a level beyond language, because this language, a translation language like we have here, or any language that I'm going to use now, is going to inherently limit these concepts. So I'm hoping you can tune into it on a deeper level, on a intuitive or soulful or spiritual level, that you can connect with this idea. The idea that we're talking about here is how the essence, I'm going to refer to this as essence with a capital E. The essence has an infinite power, and because infinite can also mean an infinite number of things, hence the multiplicity, hence the plurality, hence the diversity, which is Elokim. The essence, in a sense, demands that Elokim be an outcome of that, of its essence. Essence, pure divine essence, infinite essence, almost demands that you have diversity. At the same time, within the infinite essence, the diversity, right? The infinite power of the essence is not split into different parts, but it's all one within the essence, within the infinite essence. So within God's essence, I'm using now God's essence, right? Within God's essence, you have an infinite power of creation, but all within one single space, so to speak. And none of what I said, what I just said now, none of this is using accurate language, because the language that I'm using is limited to the language that you and I have is language that exists here for our conditions. We're now speaking about God's conditions, the essence's conditions, which are completely different than our conditions. So inherently, all language will fail. But I'm hoping you're sensing what I'm trying to say without getting caught on the word specifically. The infinite essence of God contains infinite possibility, which is expressed by the name Elokim, which creates diversity. At the same time, that infinite power, that infinite possibility is one essence. It's not multiple essences. It's in one space, which means that the diversity and the infinity is unified and absolutely one. Not as a unification of many pieces, but an essential unity that transcends diversity. This is the paradox of essence, of God's essence. It has, because it's infinite, it has both sides of the coin. It has infinite broken out, and it is the infinite of oneness in the very same space. This is a reality and a condition that we can't speak of because we don't have it. There's no language that can accurately express this because it doesn't exist here. Number one, infinite is not something that we have. Number two, the dual state of infinite and oneness, and not oneness, diverse becoming one, like we said before, with regard to Havaya at the end of last chapter. That's not what we're saying now. Not echad, one. Yachid, in the Hebrew, it's yachid, not echad. Yachid means singular, not like the old cell phone company either. Yachid means singular, like the only one. Not many becoming one, not a unity of particulars, but a oneness on an absolute state. Oneness that precludes the possibility of a two. So in God's essence, God is both. God's essence is both infinite without end or measure, and also absolutely one, beyond any differentiation. And both of those truths are true. Both of those are truths. Again, the last two lines here. To speak of a multiplicity within God's being would be a denial of God's fundamental oneness. We have to say that this is absolutely unified, or absolutely one. Rather, the particulars are united into oneness, in an ultimate state of unity. But on the other hand, we cannot say that his unity, that the oneness, negates the capacity for multiplicity. Go back the other way. We say God is one. Not God is one. The essence is oneness, is absolute unity. Yachid, not even echad, but oneness. Sorry, not oneness of many, but oneness of singularity. But we can't say that negates the capacity for multiplicity. On the other hand, for within his perfection, this is the key word, for within the infinite perfection of God, he must contain this capacity too, which is multiplicity, yet he is at the same time a perfect unity. And I hope you understand that within the limitations of this translation, what the text is doing is balancing these two truths. These two truths that are true with God's essence. Number one, infinite multiplicity, infinite variety, right? You think Baskin Robbins has a lot of varieties and flavors. Are you kidding me? You think Ben & Jerry's has a lot of flavors? I don't know why I'm stuck on ice cream now. How many flavors, how many things, how many particulars can come from an infinite God? You know the answer. Infinite, right? Literally infinite. Not like a lot infinite, but infinite. At the same time, God's essence is a state of absolute singularity. I'm not even going to use the word oneness, because that's going to get us confused with the other state, with Havaya. This essence, beyond names, beyond Havaya and Elokim, or beyond Elokim and Havaya, right? This essence has both infinite variety and infinite singularity. The variety and the multiplicity, the potential for that at least, is in a state of absolute singularity. Because this is what makes God's essence perfect. In the parentheses, this is in the original. Perfection, as explained elsewhere, entails the coexistence of opposites rather than a one-dimensional state of being. When you find the paradox, you found God, is what he's saying here. If you found one thing, you haven't yet reached the essence. You speak of Havaya as one-dimensional, Elokim as one-dimensional, different dimensions, but then you know you're not at the essence. The essence is where the walls collapse on monolithic thinking. It's where the paradox is fully at home. It's where you have absolute diversity and absolute singularity in the same place. That's where the essence is. Not where the essence is, but that's what the essence is. Absolute infinite diversity, absolute infinite singularity. That's what perfection means. The coexistence of opposites. Not a one-dimensional state of being. Let's go. Within him, however, this potential for diversity within unity is not contradictory, heaven forbid. Rather, both the unity and diversity exist as one simultaneously. So you can't even say that these are two powers within the essence, that the essence has both the power of infinite diversity and infinite singularity, but these two dimensions are really one. It's really one state of being. It's not even one coin with two sides. It's two dimensions occupying the same space. Mortal intellect, another parenthesis in the original. Mortal intellect cannot understand the nature and the explanation of this coexistence of two apparent opposites. This is a situation in which the saying applies, if I understood him, I would be him. You ever hear that expression about God? If I understood him, I would be him. If I could understand this exactly how this works, then I would be God. If I can't understand it, then I guess it means, I guess I tried, but I'm still not yet God. What can I do? What can I do? Not there yet. What's the point? What's the point of this? The point is that we have, very clearly, we have two, sorry, it's not two, it's really one. But we have these, I'm gonna use the word two, just because we have to communicate some way. We have these two realities within the essence. One is infinite expression, diverse expression. How many things can God create? 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 1,000,000,000,000? Nope, the number doesn't end. There's an endless number of things that God can create, and God did create an endless number of beings. Right? How many angels are there? Is there a number? How many souls out there? Fragments of souls, pieces of souls, sparks of light. How many? Start counting. Right? It's without end. Where does it come from? The infinite essence. And yet in the infinite essence, there's the power or the force of absolute oneness, singularity. And that singularity, the power of singularity and the power of diversity exists in the same space. The human mind can't fathom this. The human mind can't understand this. The human mouth cannot express this accurately. However, does dictate that God's perfection must entail the aforementioned paradox. He says, even though we can't understand it, logically, you have to say it's so. He doesn't explain why that's so, by the way. He doesn't back this up by giving you a philosophical construct, on a chalkboard saying, well, if this, and then this, and then this, therefore you have to conclude that this is true, even though it doesn't make sense. He doesn't write out the formula on the board for you. But what he does say is that this is something that we have to say. Because really, I'll tell you the formula. Because otherwise, we're limiting God to one direction versus the other. We're either saying that God is only diverse or only singular, right? And that itself is a limitation. And if you say that God has two dimensions, then again, you're messing up that oneness. So you have to say that all of that infinite expression is within the very same space as that oneness. Doesn't make sense. When I say it doesn't make sense, we can't relate to it, right? We can't live that. When I say live that, we can't experience that in our own lives because we're not the infinite essence, but that's how it exists. Thus, the bottom line, here's the bottom line. Thus, this summarizes what we said thus far in chapter 20. Thus, the infinite. You see? It's adopting my language here. Thus, the infinite has the power of multiplicity, infinite diversity, while also being an absolute unity, not unity of diversity, but unity of singularity. I haven't looked, I must confess, I have not looked at the translation. I'm not liking the way this next paragraph reads at the beginning. I prepare it from the original, from the Hebrew. I'm going to this word, this phrase comes about. No. We've just explained. And I just looked at the Hebrew. This is not the best way to say this. We just explained that in the infinite essence, there are two powers that are really one. Okay, but two power. But for our language, we have to split it up. There's two powers: infinite diversity, infinite expansion, and also infinite oneness. Imagine, I'm just giving you a physical example. Imagine two different, those flashlights where it has like an adjustable beam and you can make it go wide or make it concentrated, or like a shower, you can have like a strong force but like more limited versus like a wider kind of like diverse with less power. So not exactly, right, obviously, but in a similar vein, we're saying that essence, the divine essence, has these two dimensions, if you will. It has the infinite expansion, infinite diversity, and at the very same time, it also has absolute oneness. like a fierce singularity. Everything is in one space. And it's impossible to it's a paradox, but that's where it is. It's within the infinite essence. Where and how is this paradox expressed? Remember, there's a paradox, which means there's two forces that are one, but it's still kind of two. Where is it manifest as two separate worlds and realities? The two names, Havaya and Elokim. That's the big idea here. We may say then, that this paradox finds expression, or is expressed, through the name Havaya and the name Elokim. Each one expresses one of the essence's abilities or powers or truths. There are two truths that are one, but still two. But in our linear mind, there are still two truths: God's infinite expansion and infinite oneness, singularity. And the two names Havaya and Elokim represent one of those. Express, reveal, bring to the world one of those two realities of the divine essence. The name Elokim reveals the essence's multiplicity, the infinite expansion. Right? We said that infinite expansion, diversity. Which name of God expresses that? Elokim. Elokim reveals. Now it uses reveals. Catching on. Reveals multiplicity. The existence of limitless creations. Remember, understood in this way, the name Elokim is not a distortion of truth. Right? We might have said, the truth is God is one. When you have diversity, it's a distortion of the truth, and the goal is to do away with the many and go back to one. That's not true. That's not true. The truth is, in the essence of God, there is diversity. There is the power of infinite multiplicity within a single space. But that power is there in the source. Elokim is not a distortion of God's essence. It's an expression of God's essence in one way. The name Havaya, on the other hand, reveals unity, the other dimension, if you will, of God's essence, in that all of the particular levels of the emanations and the creations are unified and included in the unity of the one Yachid. The many particulars are truly one. It reveals the unity which is within Atzmut, God's essential being. God's essential being has both realities, the infinite multiplicity and the absolute infinite oneness, or unity. Elokim represents the one, Havaya represents the other, or Elokim reveals the one, and Havaya reveals the other. Understood in this way, it's less oppositional. Havaya and Elokim are not working against each other. They're bringing out two truths, two complementary truths. There is incredible diversity and incredible singularity in the same space. That's from the source. And these two realities, two truths, are being manifest by Havaya and Elokim, or by Elokim and Havaya. They're not contradictory. They're not oppositional. They don't work against each other. Together, they create the mosaic of truth, the truth of God's essence. And so, we're not going to finish this chapter. We're going to stop right here for today. And so, when we think about the world that we live in, and when we think about the challenge of our times, which is without a doubt in my mind, the challenge of our times is the notion of how to get along with the other that we perceive as different. Whether in a family, whether in a group, whether in a larger segment, it doesn't matter what segment it is. How to get along with the other that you perceive as different. So you need to know this. The difference that you perceive is true. And it represents an infinite truth of God. And at the same time, that infinite truth of diversity also mandates that that the two are absolutely one. So see the other as different, but respect that difference as being one with you. because you're also different than them. They're different than you. You're different than them. And that's what creates, that's what represents and reveals the truth of the divine beauty. The truth of God's essential beauty is when you have both forces, the Elokim and Havaya, working together. You see the infinite diversity, but you see also the fierce oneness that exists in the same space. And so, my friends, as we think about where we are today, let us be committed to finding the fierce oneness within the diversity. Never expect someone to lose their identity just so you can get along with them. Find that ability to connect. Not connect from a place of, well, okay, fine, but from a place of absolute fierce unity. Find that ability within the diversity itself. That is what Elokim and Havaya demand of us. Working together, not fighting against each other. These two forces are not oppositional, they're complementary. See the other as diverse, see that as a blessing. And together we are one. Thank you for joining me this morning for Kabbalah Coffee. I look forward to continuing the discussion, this important discussion, next week. A few quick announcements. Tonight, there is a Better Together broadcast, Chabad in Town, and all of the other programs that Chabad in Town does, including in Town Jewish Academy. We are getting together for an evening of enjoyment. We have a pickle making program, a mentalist, and a comedian starting at 6:30. A little bit of a different energy from today's class, I know, but it's also good to smile a little and to enjoy. So take a look at Chabad in Town's website or Chabad in Town Facebook page, or reach out to me and I will send you the link for that. It's on Zoom. Join us live. Tomorrow night is the Yiddish course is launching. Tuesday night, The Giving Tree, a Jewish Perspective. I'm launching a class, it's a one-time session, but a workshop on the Giving Tree, understanding lessons from the Giving Tree on education, on parenting, and on leadership from Shaul Silverstein's famous book. And of course, tomorrow night, the Yiddish course. Stay tuned for more exciting announcements coming soon. But it's great to see you all. Let's love each other and let's get along and let's celebrate the diversity that we have. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. Have a great day. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.